Before we start, close your eye. Your brain will create all the visual. Let's start. Most people don't think about how small spaces really are. We walk into rooms. We sit in cars. We crawl under tables to grab something that rolled away. We squeeze into tight elevators and joke about it for a few seconds before the doors open again. We always know there's an end, a way out. That's what makes tight spaces tolerable. The certainty that if you keep moving, you'll eventually emerge somewhere open. Now imagine that certainty disappearing, not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly. Imagine realizing that the space around you isn't opening anymore, that it's narrowing, that every movement forward makes turning back harder. And imagine realizing this upside down. Welcome to DarkStory Lab. This is Jake. And tonight, this is not a ghost story. This is not a mystery. This is not something that can be explained away or dismissed. This is a true story about a man who walked into a cave believing he would be home for dinner, and slowly realized that the cave was not going to let him go. This is the story of the Nutty Putty Cave incident. Nutty Putty Cave was never meant to be dangerous. That's what made it famous. Located in Utah, it was known as a beginner cave, a place where families went, where college students explored, where people crawled through narrow passages for fun, trusting that someone had been there before them and made it back out. The cave didn't look threatening from the outside. No warning signs of death. No history of tragedy that scared people away. It felt controlled, mapped, safe. And safety breeds confidence. Confidence makes people go a little farther than they should. On November 24th, 2009, John Edward Jones went caving with family members. John was a husband, a father, a medical student, someone who understood the human body and how fragile it could be. He wasn't reckless. That's important. He didn't go in drunk. He didn't go in alone. He didn't ignore warnings. He went in thinking this was manageable. At some point during the exploration, John believed he had found a familiar passage called the birth canal, a tight crawl space that eventually opened into a larger area. It looked right. It felt right. And that assumption changed everything. Because the passage he entered wasn't the birth canal. It was something far worse. As John crawled forward, the tunnel narrowed. That was expected. Nutty Putty was full of tight squeezes. He exhaled to move forward, inch by inch, trusting that it would open up soon. It didn't. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle. The walls pressed tighter against his chest and hips. Gravity pulled him forward. At some point, John realized he could no longer move forward easily. That realization didn't cause panic. Not yet. Because in caves, hesitation is normal. You stop. You breathe. You adjust. John tried to back up. He couldn't. His body was wedged, his chest compressed, his arms pinned beneath him. And then came the moment that changed the situation from uncomfortable to fatal. John slipped further, just a few inches. But those inches inverted his body almost completely upside down. His head was lower than his feet. Blood rushed to his skull. Pressure built in his chest. Breathing became harder. Still, he didn't panic. People don't panic immediately in situations like this. They problem solve. John tried to move his legs. The rock pressed back. He tried to shift his hips. Nothing moved. He called out. The sound didn't travel far. Caves swallow noise. His family heard him eventually. They tried to reach him, but the tunnel was too narrow. They couldn't even see him clearly. Rescue teams were called. And that's when the real horror began. Because caves don't allow urgency. Everything takes time. Equipment had to be brought in piece by piece. Rescuers had to squeeze through the same narrow passages. Every movement risked making things worse. John was trapped upside down, and the human body is not designed for that. As minutes turned into hours, The pressure on his heart increased. His breathing became labored. His voice weakened. But he stayed conscious. He talked. He joked at times. He told his wife he loved her. Rescuers rigged a complex pulley system. They slowly, carefully tried to lift him inch by inch. For a moment it worked. John moved. Hope surged. And then, the system failed. A critical anchor point broke. John slipped back into the same position. Only worse. That moment sealed the outcome. Because by then, his body had been inverted too long. Blood pressure in his head became dangerous. His heart struggled to pump effectively. Rescuers knew what was happening. John likely knew too. But there was nothing left to do quickly enough. After more than 24 hours trapped upside down in the cave, John Edward Jones died. Not violently, not suddenly, quietly, surrounded by people who were trying everything they could, and still couldn't reach him. The cave was later sealed permanently, not because it was evil, but because it had proven something. That some places don't need malice to kill you. They only need a single wrong turn. I'm going to pause here, because from this point forward, the story goes much deeper. Into the rescue attempt minute by minute, the psychology of claustrophobia, why the human body fails upside down, and why this incident still haunts rescuers who were there. Once the initial shock passed, the reality of John's position began to settle over everyone involved. He wasn't just stuck, he was stuck in a way that punished time itself. Being upside down doesn't feel immediately dangerous. People hang upside down for fun, for seconds at a time. Blood rushes to the head, pressure builds, and then you flip back upright and laugh it off. But the human body is not built to sustain that position. As John remained inverted, gravity worked against every system keeping him alive. Blood pooled in his head and chest. His lungs struggled to expand fully. Each breath required more effort than the last. Still, he stayed calm. That detail matters. Rescuers later said John never screamed. He never begged. He never panicked in the way movies portray trapped people. Panic wastes oxygen. Panic accelerates exhaustion. John conserved energy instinctively. He answered questions when spoken to. He followed instructions as best he could. He tried to shift his weight when rescuers asked, even though each movement caused pain and made breathing harder. Pain in this situation wasn't sharp. It was crushing. Pressure against the chest makes it feel like you can't fully inhale, even when air is present. Your body knows oxygen is there, but it can't access it properly. That sensation triggers fear at a primal level. John fought that instinct. Rescuers reached him after crawling through the same narrow passage, scraping themselves raw against rock, carrying equipment that felt impossibly heavy in such confined space. The cave didn't allow mistakes. Every movement had to be calculated. One wrong shift could wedge John tighter or cause a rock fall. They couldn't turn him around. There wasn't enough room. They couldn't lift him straight up. Gravity and the slope worked against them. So they improvised. They attached ropes to John's ankles and waist. They anchored pulleys in the cave walls. Each anchor point had to hold under immense tension. The plan was to raise him just enough to relieve pressure, then slowly inch him back the way he came. Slow was the only option. In caves, speed is dangerous. As the rescue continued, hours passed. John's voice weakened, not because he was giving up, but because his body was working harder just to function. He asked about his wife. He talked about his children. He trusted the people around him completely. That trust was heavy. Rescuers later said that knowing John was conscious made the situation harder. When someone is unconscious, you focus on procedure. When someone is talking to you, the situation becomes painfully human. You're not rescuing a body. You're rescuing a person who knows what's happening. The cave didn't care. The rock walls didn't shift to make room. The passage didn't widen because people needed it to. Nature didn't negotiate. At one point, the rescue team managed to lift John slightly, enough that he could breathe more easily, enough that hope returned. Those moments are dangerous. Hope changes behavior. People push harder. They rush decisions. They trust equipment more than they should. The pulley system was under enormous strain. Anchors drilled into rock that was never meant to support that kind of force. Then, without warning, one of the anchor points failed. The sound wasn't dramatic. A sharp snap. Then gravity did what it always does. John slipped back down into the same position he had been trapped in before. Only this time, his body twisted slightly. The pressure increased. Rescuers knew immediately what that meant. The chances of survival dropped sharply. John didn't scream. He went quiet. Not unconscious. Quiet. That quiet is something rescuers never forget. Because silence in a cave isn't peaceful. It's final. The team continued working, knowing the odds were no longer in their favor. Not because they believed John was gone, but because his body had been inverted too long. The heart struggles to pump blood uphill for extended periods. Blood pressure in the brain becomes dangerously high. Organs begin to fail one by one, not catastrophically, but subtly. The body shuts down in layers. John's breathing became shallow. His responses slowed. His words shortened. And then, after more than 24 hours trapped underground, John Edward Jones died. Not from crushing, not from suffocation, not from panic. From the simple fact that the human body cannot survive that long upside down. Rescuers stayed with him. They didn't leave immediately. Because even after death, caves don't let go easily. Recovering John's body was deemed too dangerous, too likely to cause further collapse, too risky for the living. The decision was made to seal the cave. John's body remains there, not as a warning, not as a symbol, but as a reality. The cave was filled and permanently closed, the entrance buried, the location marked. Nutty Putty Cave no longer exists as an accessible space, but the story does. And it doesn't go away, because it forces people to confront something uncomfortable. That danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it feels like confidence. Sometimes it feels like experience. Sometimes it feels like familiarity. And sometimes it feels like just one more step forward. After the rescue attempt ended, the cave didn't feel like a place anymore. For the people who had been inside it, Nutty Putty became a moment frozen in time, a stretch of hours that replayed endlessly, not because of what went wrong, but because of how close it came to going right. That closeness is what haunted the rescuers. They knew they had touched him. They knew they had spoken to him. They knew that for a brief window, they had changed the outcome. And then gravity took it back. Cave rescuers are trained to accept loss. Underground environments are unforgiving, and not every mission ends with someone walking out. But this case was different, because John wasn't lost in a collapse. He wasn't buried. He wasn't unreachable. He was right there, just out of reach. That distance, measured in inches, became unbearable. Rescuers later described dreams where they were still in the cave, still adjusting ropes, still trying to make space where none existed. They woke up feeling the same pressure in their chests, the same urgency in their hands. Claustrophobia doesn't always come from being trapped. Sometimes it comes from witnessing it. John's family was informed above ground while the rescue was still ongoing. They waited, hoping, listening for updates that never came fast enough. His wife was pregnant at the time. That detail matters, not for sentimentality, but for reality. John wasn't an abstract victim. He wasn't a name on a report. He was a man who expected to come home, and that expectation lingered in the cave. People often ask why John didn't panic sooner. Why he didn't force his way back when he felt the tunnel narrowing. The answer is uncomfortable, because he did what most people would do. He trusted familiarity. Nutty Putty was known for tight passages. That was the appeal. John had been in caves before. He had crawled through narrow spaces and emerged fine. Experience breeds confidence. Confidence delays fear. By the time fear arrives, options are already gone. That pattern repeats itself in many tragedies. Not recklessness, familiarity. The caving community reeled after the incident. Nutty Putty had been controversial even before John's death. It was known for its tight squeezes, confusing passages, and tendency to funnel people deeper without obvious markers. After the incident, it was sealed permanently. Some argued it should have been closed sooner. Others argued that personal responsibility mattered more than regulation. But those arguments missed the point, because this wasn't about policy. It was about human limits. Caves don't behave like open spaces. They don't offer perspective. You can't see what's ahead. You can't judge distance or slope accurately. Your body tells you what feels possible, until it doesn't. John's body told him he could move forward. It didn't warn him about what would happen after. That delay between action and consequence is what makes caves dangerous. And it's what makes this story linger. People who hear about the Nutty Putty Cave incident often imagine themselves there. Not heroically rescuing, not dramatically suffering, just crawling, just moving forward, just realizing too late that turning around isn't an option anymore. That realization is deeply unsettling because it removes agency. There is no villain to fight, no decision to undo, no clever trick to escape. Only gravity and time. And gravity never negotiates. The incident changed how rescue teams approach cave emergencies. It reshaped training, equipment, and risk assessment. But it didn't erase the memory, because no amount of protocol can eliminate the fact that some environments don't allow correction. You get one chance to choose direction. And sometimes, the wrong direction feels exactly like the right one. That's the quiet horror of Nutty Putty. Not the darkness, not the tightness, not even the death. The moment when everything still feels manageable, when you think you can go a little farther, and the cave lets you. What makes the Nutty Putty Cave incident so difficult to let go of is that it doesn't rely on mystery. There's no unanswered question at the center of it. No missing piece that, once discovered, would make everything make sense. Everything is known. The tunnel was mapped. The slope was measured. The rescue attempt was documented. The cause of death was understood. And yet, the story refuses to feel complete. Because knowledge doesn't bring comfort here. It brings clarity. And clarity is sometimes worse. When people imagine danger, they picture chaos. Something unpredictable. Something that explodes into their lives without warning. Nutty Putty was the opposite. It was predictable. The cave did exactly what caves do. Gravity behaved exactly as it always does. The human body responded exactly as physiology says it will. Nothing broke the rules, and that's what makes the incident terrifying, because it means no rules were violated. John didn't ignore a red flag screaming for attention. He didn't push past an obvious boundary. He didn't gamble recklessly with his life. He followed a familiar pattern. He moved forward when it felt reasonable to do so. That's the part people struggle to accept. We want tragedies to have a moment of obvious error, a single decision we can point to and say, that's where it went wrong. Nutty Putty doesn't offer that comfort. The decision that sealed John's fate didn't feel dangerous when he made it. It felt normal. Caves distort perception in subtle ways. Depth feels shallower than it is. Slopes feel manageable until gravity commits you to them. Tight spaces feel negotiable until your body becomes the measuring tool. By the time the body says no, the The cave has already said yes. That delay is deadly. People who hear this story often ask what they would have done differently. They imagine themselves stopping earlier, turning back, recognizing the danger sooner. But imagination benefits from hindsight. In real time, John had none. He had experience, he had confidence, he had a cave that thousands had entered and exited before. The cave didn't change. The conditions didn't suddenly worsen. The margin simply disappeared. That's why this story lingers in the minds of rescuers long after the equipment was packed away, because it reveals how thin the line really is between safe and irreversible. The rescue itself demonstrated the same truth. Rescuers did everything right. They adapted, they innovated, they risked their own safety. They came closer than most people ever get in situations like this. And still, the cave didn't give enough. Not because anyone failed, because some environments don't allow success once certain thresholds are crossed. That idea is deeply unsettling. It suggests that preparation has limits, that skill has limits, that intention has limits, that sometimes all the right actions taken too late are indistinguishable from the wrong actions taken early. The Nutty Putty Cave incident isn't a warning about caves alone. It's a warning about momentum, about how easily forward motion becomes commitment, how quickly commitment becomes constraint. Once gravity commits your body to a position, intention stops mattering. You can want to go back all you like. The cave doesn't care. That indifference is what makes this story feel almost cruel, even though there was no cruelty involved, no malice, no intent, no hostility, just physics. And physics doesn't make exceptions for hope. People who suffer from claustrophobia often describe their fear as irrational. They know, logically, that the space they're in isn't dangerous, that nothing is closing in, that they can leave. Nutty Putty removes that reassurance. It shows a scenario where the fear is rational, where the space really is closing, where leaving really isn't an option, and where calm, patience, and cooperation still aren't enough. That's why people feel this story in their bodies when they hear it. Tight chests, shallow breaths, the urge to stretch or stand up. Your body understands before your mind does. It recognizes the conditions, because evolution taught it to fear spaces that don't allow reversal. John's story has been told and retold, not because people enjoy tragedy, but because it exposes something uncomfortable about ourselves. We trust environments more than we should. We assume that because something hasn't gone wrong before, it won't go wrong now. We mistake familiarity for safety. Nutty Putty didn't need to be unpredictable to be deadly. It needed one person to believe the passage ahead would open up, and the cave let that belief exist until it was too late to matter. When the cave was finally sealed, there was no ceremony, no speeches, no sense of closure. Just concrete poured into an opening that had already taken too much. Nutty Putty. Cave didn't become safer. It stopped existing. And that decision alone says everything. The cave wasn't sealed because it was evil. It wasn't sealed because of superstition. It was sealed because it proved a truth no one wanted to face. That some environments don't forgive learning curves. That some mistakes can't be corrected once they're made. John Edward Jones didn't disappear into legend. He didn't become a mystery. His story didn't drift into myth. It stayed painfully specific. A tunnel, a slope, a body upside down, a rescue that came close enough to hurt. That specificity is what keeps this story alive. Because it doesn't allow distance. You can't abstract it. You can't turn it into a monster. You can't blame an unknown force. Everything that happened makes sense, and that's what makes it unbearable. People often say that fear comes from the unknown. Nutty Putty shows the opposite. Fear can come from knowing exactly what's happening and realizing it doesn't change the outcome. John knew rescuers were there. Rescuers knew what needed to be done. Everyone involved knew time was the enemy, and still, the cave didn't yield. That kind of helplessness leaves a mark, not just on families, but on entire communities. Cavers began re-evaluating what beginner really means. Rescue teams rewrote protocols. Land managers reconsidered access to places that rely on trust rather than margin. But even with all those changes, one thing remained unchanged: the human instinct to move forward, to believe the space ahead will open up. That instinct is ancient. It's what drives exploration, discovery, progress. It's the reason people enter caves at all. Nutty Putty didn't punish curiosity. It punished assumption. The assumption that forward always leads somewhere better. The assumption that if you fit going in, you'll fit coming out. The assumption that help, once it arrives, can always fix what went wrong. Those assumptions feel reasonable, until gravity gets involved, until the body becomes the limiting factor, until time stops being something you manage and becomes something that manages you. John's story lingers because it strips away drama and leaves only consequence. There's no lesson wrapped in heroism, no final act of triumph, no revelation that redeems the loss, just a quiet truth. That some spaces don't care who you are. They don't care how prepared you feel. They don't care how many people are trying to help. They respond only to physics. And physics is patient. It waits for alignment. It waits for commitment. It waits for the moment when reversal is no longer possible. Nutty Putty. Cave doesn't exist anymore, but the conditions that created this tragedy still do. Tight spaces, downward slopes, confidence built on familiarity. Those exist everywhere. And that's why this story doesn't fade. Because it isn't about caves. It's about the moment when you realize the space around you is no longer negotiable. When movement becomes a trap. When stillness becomes survival. When time becomes something you can hear in your own breathing. That realization doesn't need darkness to be frightening. It only needs truth. If this story stayed with you, not because it was loud, but because it was real, that's the kind of horror we tell here. At DarkStory Lab, we don't rely on ghosts or myths. We explore the moments where reality itself becomes unbearable, where fear doesn't come from the unknown, but from understanding exactly what's happening and knowing it can't be changed. If you want more true stories like this, stories that unfold slowly, honestly, and stay with you long after the video ends, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if this story affected you, let me know by liking the video and sharing it with someone who understands how silence can be heavier than sound. This is Jake. Thank you for listening. And remember, some places don't trap you with force. They trap you with the belief that there's still room to move forward until there isn't.